Good evening, March 2nd, and welcome to the Alan Osborne Show. We're going to do a little bit different kind of show tonight. Uh, what's going on is called the fleecing of Fred Tricker. And Boots McCormick is set to remove Fred Tricker, but the question is, who's told Boots and why? And what has Fred Tricker done? And my answer is nothing. He's trying to do the right thing by the citizens, and tonight's video will demonstrate exactly what's going on. So without further ado, we're going to go to the October 12th planning board on the Moxy Hotel, and we're going to find why Fred they want to get rid of him. All right. So this would be an investigative report. Stand by.
Nick, you got some more?
Okay, this is the applicant for the Moxy Hotel.
Public comments? Anyone like to? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Fred.
I just got one question.
Yes, sir.
What's the stormwater design?
This is Fred Tricker.
Design based on in terms of standards?
This is a 100-year storm event. It exceeds Walt County's minimum criteria for a 25-year storm event. And as I mentioned, we are connecting into the DOT drainage system. So it's an enhanced or increased storm event that we're meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be built up. I'm assuming there's going to be some fill because I know the water table's a little high.
Yes, I know you're very familiar with this area. And this area drops down to, when you drive down Grand Boulevard, it actually slopes down from Grand Boulevard. There will be quite a bit of fill here.
Who was asking was Dean, because he's an engineer and works in Sandestin. I don't think this guy ought to be on the planning board. And guess who else is there? Robert Nelson. He has no idea what the DRI is about and doesn't care. He's there to vote how he's told. Look at Lurch over there on the right. But go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Good looking project. Only Fred's asked about the
Yes,
stormwater.
sir.
So here I come.
For the record, Alan Osborne, I got a couple of questions, Mr. Perry, if you could answer that first. You may have to.
Public comments? Yes, sir.
Okay, we might have connection might be a little hard, but here I come up here to talk about it. Sorry if it happened again.
For the record, Alan Osborne, I got a couple of questions, Mr. Perry, if you could answer that first. You may have to refer to legal. Is the current Sandestin governing document for the DRI revised ordinance 2017-12 is the last adopted requirements of the DRI? Is that not correct?
That's probably a question for Mac. That is 2017. Okay.
Okay, that being said, I'm going to reference a couple of things.
Okay, so I just asked them, what are the rules? And has anything changed since 2017? Mac says no. Mac knows nothing has happened since 2017. And Mac also knows that whether the citizens can intervene is under appeal. So go ahead.
This is parcel 208 and 308, which I understand is exempt from a lot of things. The document I'm reading from is the revised ordinance. I'm a stamped copy that I got from a public records request. It's stamped by the clerk and recorded 9/35 in 2017, November. But the most important thing in here is, let's get to the findings of facts.
Findings of facts.
Section 1 is a list of all the ordinances. Included on there is item 89-9, adopted August 28, 1989, the Second Amendment. I'm not going to read all the other things because there's been, let's see how many it says. There's probably been at least 12 ordinance changes to the DRI since 1976. But the most important thing starts at item 12, the agreement concerning Sandestin's development of regional impacts executed between the Florida Department of Community Affairs, Sandestin Corporation. It's known as the 1980 County. It's the 1984 agreement. That's page 4. The most
Lee Perry is as nervous as a cat in a box with no litter. Watch him. He don't like this at all because I'm reading the truth. Barbara Brooke looks concerned. The other people like, oh shit, they're not gonna. Robert's just looking for his phone so somebody can tell him what to do.
important thing that Mr. Tricker just about hit on there is I'm going to go to the findings of fact of the conclusion. And by the way, what I'm reading you from was signed by the county attorney, stamped by the Board of County Commissioners, and adopted by law. And if you're an attorney, my other question to that, who is advising planning and the boards on this particular issue.
This is a key issue.
Which attorney?
Which issue?
This Sandestin, this project right here.
Nobody's spoken to us about it. This is the first we're hearing about
Or
it.
how about the staff?
Well, you'd have to ask that.
The reason I'm asking is the current county attorney, and I have his contract here. He's declared a conflict with this, and he has to provide in writing who the substitute counsel is to advise the county and the board.
So what they've just told us is no legal person has said this is cool, and the only person's word that we're relying on is Matt Carpenter. If you hadn't seen my last show, at this point, Matt Carpenter is not even a realtor. So you've heard the charges on Mac. The administrative proceedings against him said he was fraudulent. And he's being fraudulent right now because he knows that the Sandestin DRI standard for drainage and water retention has not been changed, and thereby is in substantial deviation, and they shouldn't even be reviewing this project, no matter what standard it can make. That's the way the rules work. But let's go ahead now.
So I have that here if you want. So I was just asking, has anybody been appointed to that? Because I've got his contract here that requires that.
Clay's got a conflict.
But moving on, just mentioning that, so in case the staff's getting advice, I'm asking.
Lee thinks it's fun.
If you go on the conclusion of law at the end of it, I've got it marked. It says right here, 208 and 308 is what we're talking about. The amended development orders, all these, shall not apply to 208, 308, because the master developer, Sandestin, which I believe is whoever owns it right now, whatever he's calling his. It says a lot of this stuff they don't have to follow, these amended orders. But what it does say, it says right here, amended development order, this one, 2017-12, shall replace and supersede all sand development orders except the 1984 agreement, which I have with me. Those drainage standards adopted by that ordinance are in place, and 208 and 308 get a pass, according to this section 3, on everything that ordinance 8909 and the 84 settlement agreement. What that means is they don't have a height restriction, but they have drainage and traffic requirements. I will tell you, the Grand Boulevard traffic and the Sandestin Master Traffic Plan has not been updated in years, and I would tell you it's in substantial deviation from that. But this right here is a half-inch retention. So unless the attorney can, and I'll give him a chance to rebut me here, that this is not adopted and that there's anything that superseded it. So as a conclusion of law, it said any parcel in Sandestin must comply with that 84 settlement agreement. I just recently got a hold of this whole problem. So this issue hasn't been before because this is a finding of fact by Walton County Legal. Additionally, going with that, I have the original 84 settlement agreement and all the provisions of it that outline this. And even the county expert that they've
said a word over here. This is an attorney right here. Now he's nervous too because he knows I'm right, but he ain't gonna say I'm wrong because he ain't even looked at the shit. He has no idea what I'm talking about, but he's the planning attorney. That means he hasn't read the emails. Look, Mac's getting concerned. The attorney's not telling me not to talk about it. So I'm talking about the very ordinance that my lawsuit's over that Clay won't let me talk about in the other hearing. But look, this is all about Fred. They're going to come after Fred because Fred asked about the drainage, and he also knows that they produced documents the day of this hearing digitally that nobody had a chance to review, not even the board or the public. So if they didn't produce them till the day of this meeting, how could anybody have reviewed them? And then they do it again at the BCC. But go ahead there.
They adopted this report. It says, interpretation has been the DRI standard has been the subject of much disagreement. Whether or not retaining the runoff from a 3-year, 24-hour event means the overflow should not occur. However, it does exceed the proposed standard of the LDC. The DRI is quite clear in defining the standard as a retention standard. And it's to be retained into the lakes of Sandestin. He just told you he's going to dump it in the DOT right away. That 84 settlement agreement prohibits that. It says, and this is from the 84 settlement agreement. I got it from the county, so I shouldn't have to provide it to you. It says, water retention. The older practice of curbing roads direct.
Lee Perry just looked to the lawyer for somebody to save him, and they don't care. Michael Harbin's grinning because he's going to vote for anything anyway. Barbara Brooks looks concerned, wants somebody to say something. Fred knows that the county's lying. Dean just wants to vote, or excuse me, Dean just wants to vote, and Robert just wants to vote for whatever I don't want, and he doesn't know what's going on.
Into runoff sewers and lakes into the bay will not be employed. It said the water will pass through the soils and vegetation of the lake shown in the master plan of the DRI. And it represents an efficient means of retaining the water in a readily usable form. It goes on to say that it will go through many layers. And this has been ignored by the staff, but it's not the subject of current litigation. This is. There's nothing about the There's nothing about the traffic and the drainage. It's a litigation. And you can watch the county meeting on that the other day. So it says, these the retention water will be recirculated many times via the lakes and will not reach the public waters or anywhere. It never says you can put it out.
Will not reach the public waters, but there's parts of the. Why does the county fight me so hard? A lot of you go, why didn't the county just admit it? Because the county is the worst violator. According to Dr. Harper's report, SDI, Sandestin, and the SOA, depending on who owns what, there's violations all over that of the water standard, but the worst standard of all is in the county right-of-way in Driftwood, where the county has been spending money to install large pipes over the years to do exactly what their ordinance prohibits, and then holding nobody responsible. And they know it. Continue.
It says you will retain it into the lake system for further use. So I don't think you can approve this. I think you got some huge things. And unless somebody says that this finding of legal fact, unless their engineer's ready to get up here and sign a statement saying, I certify that this meets the retention standards adopted, what you're finding of fact, governing body for the PRI. Unless, if they're willing to give you a certification that this meets this retention requirement of 6.7 inches before it goes anywhere other than the lake system in Sandestin, I'm good with that, but no other engineers can go to sign that. If somebody has a conflict with Sandestin here and's worked on, I'd ask you not to vote on it. But I'm telling you, I got the
Dean's
documents.
worked on it.
I got them all here. You can take a break, look at them, defend them. I'll answer anything on this. I've got Clay's contract here where it requires you. So this is really a moral issue here. Are you going to look at these documents that the staff may not have interpreted right and everything might have been? Because remember, this isn't optional. It says that nobody can change the 84 settlement agreement. Y'all change everything else you want. I know he doesn't need permission. I'm not saying that his hotel's too high. It's exempt as long as the requirements for Sandestin development order are met. So you don't get all these free passes unless you meet the requirements. So if the requirements for traffic aren't proven, if the requirements for drainage aren't proven, I'd ask you to make sure that this is researched and either punt until somebody wants to do this, or I'd ask you to vote no. And I can answer any question. I brought about 1,000 documents with me. When I brought my fan drives, I can pull up any of these orders. I can pull up any of these reports. In fact, Larry Jones testified that my documents were complete in the county, so I'm happy to put that out. So that's where we get at. You just simply, if you're doing it on the LDC standard, a 100-year storm is not graded unless he wants to say, my plan retains 6.7 inches of water for 24 hours before it discharges it anywhere else, because that's what this says. I've always talked around, but now that I have a finding of fact of legal law, I believe in the past the board and the BCC has violated this. Well, past mistakes are not permission if you're on notice. So I'm putting all of you on notice, and I'm happy to ask the attorney. If I'm incorrect, if this finding of fact is not the most current with Sandestin, I'd be happy to hear that.
Thank you, sir.
I reserve a chance to respond to anything anybody says. I request that.
Absolutely. You're wanting stormwater not to go into the DOT.
Sir, I'm not wanting anything. I'm asking you to follow what the law says. It will not be allowed to do that. It says they must pipe it into the lake system so that it can be clean, not overload the DOT. Whether the DOT wants it or not is irrelevant of the law that's been adopted.
Okay, in the past, I think you were concerned about the improper drainage, Sandustin area, and going into the lakes and they overflowing, draining directly out to the bay. Correct me if I'm wrong.
You're wrong. In the past, I've said they eliminated lakes, which caused lakes to overflow. This is implicitly implied, described this order, that until it reaches an event that actually have made it overflow, then it can't. They just have to keep it because it says in here, and Dr. Harper says, additionally, there's another issue. The county commission, March 9th of 2021, and I have the minutes, and he can pull them up if you want, he's your attorney. The county commission voted to have Clay Atkins and bring Dr. Harper or another expert. A 4-to-1 vote. Commissioner Anderson didn't vote for it. Said he had to bring it back and explain this issue.
Here's something else. So Mac was part of that too. Mac knows they didn't do it. And Mac knows this is a major development. And I'm telling everybody, and Mac's right there, the county attorney's right there, everybody knows that something's up. And we're not going to eat up all this because this is going to be a long show because the fleecing of Fred was, and the plan to axe Fred is a plan, so it's going to take a couple shows here.
So he has failed to do what the county commission has as the staff. And if he's failed to appoint special counsel, as his requirement says on this declared conflict, then you shouldn't be going forward here today because you might be breaking the law. So just because in the past I may not have had the right document, I got it now. It's the law. And it says, thou shalt not, even 208, 308. So if anybody wants to dispute that, I got it here. You know, I was affected by it. And I want you to really think about your duty to the community, like what you just said. The lawyer was right. When the comp plan was adopted, we, the citizens, were a consideration. Our compatibility and what was around us, that was a precedence for 40 years. And I'm going to tell you, if I've got the right documents in front of me, and I believe I do, I've told you what they are, I'd ask you to vote no. And listen, if the engineer wants to sign certification, sign it meets it. I'm good, but I'm just here on the record telling you what it says. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Smith? I'm sure you have to say about that.
I do.
I'm going to save y'all for Mr. Smith because he said, I know Mr. Osborne debating that issue before the board. I don't give a shit what you know. Really? You never had the guts to call me. You get up there and try to talk nice about me. He does have one of the better plans I've seen. But the bottom line is this, and I'm going to go find it here because this show lasts forever. I've told him what the law says. This guy says he'd like to find out too but there's documents that this guy had not seen, and he discusses that at the BCC meeting later, and you'll hear that. So I'm going to skip to what they decide to do. Hold on here.
We then attenuate a 100-year storm event. We do release or pop off into the FDOT.
Now listen to what they say.
All
What's
of that
Barbara
section
Brook and
of
Fred
US Highway
say?
98 flows into a Sandestin lake. So our drainage still, once we retain a 100-year storm event, it ultimately does flow into a Sandestin lake. So I do want to make that point. We've coordinated with the SOA on this issue. They've hired their own independent engineer to review our drainage design. So I just want to make those points. As far as traffic concurrency, I know this is entitled as part of Grand Boulevard. It's entitled as part of Sandestin. But the traffic was done originally by Joe Poole. He also performed a supplemental analysis as part of this application. Again, reviewed by staff, consistent with Walton County regulations, Sandestin DRI, PUD. So this has been, reviewed by all parties and is compliant. So we request you move us forward, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
He's testifying it's completely compliant, this engineer. He ought to be liable for that when it's not.
What are our attorneys saying about this material? He says this wasn't presented before.
I've been to many meetings And I'm not an attorney, so let's
You
start with
you
that.
haven't been in any meetings I ever presented that with, because I
I
didn't.
can't speak to what he has, but I know this has been
I
debated
can't
for a very
speak to
long
what he
time.
has.
And I know the county, my experience with their engineering department has reviewed this issue and has rendered. So I can't
So
speak.
he's telling the county says he's good to go. The county engineering.
I know staff is very familiar with the 84, the agreements that are in place, everything with Sandestin. So I just know this has been debated for a long time.
Debated but not solved.
I assume if it was something that the staff knew about, or it was something that they deemed a problem, it would have already come up.
I would assume the same thing.
Yep. So they're all putting it on Mac's shoulders, Mr.
A
Fraudulent.
lot of work I'm fortunate to do with Walton County. If there was a problem, I wouldn't be standing before you. I can guarantee you that with Mr. Carpenter and his staff.
Okay.
There's no question that what you're doing is consistent with Walton County policy. The question is whether that policy has been correct. And that's what Mr. Osborne is challenging. And he's got documentation, and I think it needs to be taken seriously. And I know myself have
Listen to
met with
this.
the county. I've met with the county administrator and the county attorney on this issue back when COVID first started, and asked them if they had anything in writing to say that the Sandestin DRI standard of 6.7 inches was not still applicable, and we could use the land development code standard, and they had nothing. They couldn't come up with anything.
That statement's why they're trying to fire Fred.
We're exceeding the land development code standard.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I know this has been debated. County staff has rendered a position. Engineering has rendered a position. Yeah. And that's my position.
Okay. Any further questions? Comments?
Lee just wants to vote for it.
Well, I don't feel comfortable approving something where he claims he has brought forward new information.
Well, I think between now and the time it goes to the county commission, our attorney can look at it and see if it actually holds water.
I will say this is a quasi-judicial hearing. It's a little different than a legislative hearing in the sense that it needs to be based off the competent substantial evidence that's actually presented during the hearing. And once you have this information that's been presented.
Listen, he said competent and substantial evidence. I just gave him a order that Matt Carpenter agreed that was it. Okay? I'm sitting there holding all the minutes to all the NOPCs, and I'll take them to the BCC later in these videos and show them that nowhere has any of the information or even letters from as far back as 2007 ever been presented to the BCC formally on drainage. Furthermore, at this point, Mac and Clay are a year and a half past their deadline to produce something to the Board of County Commissioners. And here Mac sits saying nothing. Mac must go. The bottom line on this show, on this part of the show, is they agree and they vote that they only approve it if Steve Hall comes to the BCC after meeting with me, and he meets with me and Fred Tricker, and he agrees to meet with us, and we do go meet with him. And I'll get to that in a minute, but let's end this part. But that's how this goes. I'm gonna get down to the vote. What they say? Hold on, just.
Forgot our attorney. Forgotten Stephen. I can't remember his last name now. Hall. Mr. Hall.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I do have one issue I need to raise. Mr. Hall, as he mentioned, is now aware of this. There is still some pending litigation related to Sandestin involving Mr. Osborne. Mr. Hall might want to review that before committing him to assets. There could still be some pending litigation.
So Steve reviews it and agrees as an attorney and meets with me. This guy's trying to warn him about it. Clay's doing that because Clay's contacted him. But Steve agrees it's not a conflict, and we meet.
You may not be able to speak on behalf of the county. So I just want to make that caution.
I'm sorry, he may not be able to speak to him about what?
Yes, there's some likely pending litigation that's still out
About that litigation, but he,
Listen, there's no way there can be pending litigation on the Moxy Hotel in 2023 from 2017. They can't just say, you can't look at that, because if it's non-compliant, they this policy that Clay wields like Excalibur means it's this ought to be called the Excalibur policy, because they take this sword and they cut free speech in half with it. So keep on going, fellas.
speak to him about this particular issue.
That's going to be the issue on that, where the conversation might go on that. It might go into the area where I don't think you'll be able to necessarily be able to speak on it.
So here we're approving major hotels, but we can't talk about stuff that's not being legal. Listen closely to what Hall said.
Well, if I can clarify, if there was new evidence presented that is relevant to this application, I'd be glad to hear. I didn't have an opportunity to review any of the documents or even have a chance tonight.
So this guy who's representing planning as the attorney and advisor to Mac at probably $250 an hour says he ain't looked at this stuff. Listen close to our county attorney on contract.
Yes, what you said speaks very clear. I'm kind of slow-minded on stormwater stuff. So to the extent that I can hear and discuss with him the new evidence that's applicable to this case, I'd be glad to do that. I'm not saying I'm going to come up with a definitive opinion for the BOCC, but we certainly believe that he deserves a hearing on at least a personal hearing for me in my position as land use attorney.
So that's how we get to the end of this meeting. They vote for that. Fred and Barbara, I think, voted not to, or whatever, but they all voted it was contingent on Steve meeting with me and not finding there was new evidence, if he could. And he did that. But I'm going to tell you, it was all new evidence, what I showed him, but the finding was new. And I went before the BCC later, so let me skip to that and get you to that point. That was long enough, but again, this show is about why did they want to get rid of Fred Tricker? Because Fred Tricker knew that the Choctawhatchee Bay was being polluted. I believe we got saveourbays.net. Go look at that lawsuit, whistleblower lawsuit about the toxins in the bay and stuff, what the flesh-eating bacteria in the bay. Or you go read that, go look that up. But Fred knows that they're breaking the law. Now Steve doesn't necessarily, but I'm gonna tell you what Steve does. I'm gonna get to the chase. Meet with Steve. A bunch of us meet with him. We show him all the stuff, tell him it's never been put, go look at the minutes, go look at this. The Board of County Commissioners has never reviewed all this information on the drainage violations formally, because MAC won't report the violation. And the county won't. The county's not going to tell on itself, and the developer's not going to tell on itself, so that's what happens. So stand by here. Okay, we've now taken it from the planning board. We had the meeting with Steve Hall, gave Steve Hall all this information that we can prove has never been put to the BCC in a notice of proposed change, because it doesn't matter if the county's had it or what they've had. It only matters, has that information been put out about the drainage and the traffic to be reviewed by the BCC formally in that process? And the answer is no, because that's the only place they'll let you talk about it. And if MAC doesn't put it up to be talked about, and it hasn't been talked about. And right now, Clay and MAC are not complying with a motion that Boots and Danny voted yes for. Only Tony didn't vote for it. Brad wasn't there then. It's been over 2 years. Donna voted for it too. So this is why they're coming after Fred, because Fred realizes that they've slipped in new information that nobody's seen, and Fred knows that the NOPC, that none of this information, it is new. It hasn't been presented because he's already asked the administrator and the attorney. So watch what this is how come Boots comes after Fred.
discussed at your meeting already.
sorry, Ms. Bradley, you got.
Just a little bit to add. Parcel 2 at 308 never had any green space that was required to be in there. They did have an easement that was counted per the open space at the back of the property, but everything else commercial square footage.
Okay, thank you.
She knows
Any other
they're
questions for that?
non-compliant, but she won't say nothing.
Then
I'm out of
we
town,
will take,
by the way.
if there's no motions at this time, we'll take public comment. Mr. Trigger.
They know I'm out of town, so they're gonna have a massive
Mr.
discussion.
Atkinson, Mr. Tricker is still a member of the planning commission, is that correct?
To my knowledge, yes, sir.
Here comes
Is
Tony.
this some kind of conflict?
Mr. Trickle, see, I have Mr. Trickle on the record. You did hear this project as a member of the planning commission? No. You did not? It's changed. It's changed since we heard it. But you heard there's information that was put out yesterday on public record that I've never seen. Well, Mr. Tricker, the point is, you were on the planning commission when this project.
Fred's trying to tell them that we approved this project without all the information, and that yesterday more new information came out. And Clay's position is because Fred was on the board, he can't say nothing in public of what this wrong that has occurred. Now listen to this penguin pontificate. Go ahead, Clay.
Project was awesome. So I'll say what I always do when a planning commission member wants to wander up here and
I'll
give their comments. They're
pontificate.
members of the citizens.
Right.
I do not believe it is good course or prudence for somebody who votes on the planning commission to then get up.
I do not believe. There's a ruling, there's been this. I don't like it because we have to talk about something that I've spent a lot of time doing a phony baloney cover up on, and Fred's not letting it go. He's doing his duty as a citizen on that board. He's letting them know, wait a minute, that's not what we reviewed. And Steve didn't do what he said. They know I'm out of town, or I could defend this.
Then offer opinions about the project they've already voted on, especially in a quasi-judicial proceeding, because it does give the appearance, if they're speaking for or against it, that their vote on the planning board may have been compromised. So the board, if Mr. Trippett.
Everybody's vote on the board was compromised because Fred's on the board and he said new information came out yesterday that we never saw on this project. Clay, everybody's compromised. It should be kicked back to planning right now, but Clay would never let that happen, and neither would Mac.
Choose to do it. It is something that does. But he's a citizen. If he wants to stand up here and speak, he has the opportunity to do so. Thank you. My admonishment to the board is that you cannot give his opinion any more or less weight than any other citizen merely because he serves on the planning.
Admonishment is not what you should do. It'd be your advice. They're supposed to do what you just told them every single day. Shut up, Clay. God.
Board. If he offers testimony to you today in a quasi-judicial proceeding that he asserts is based on his knowledge of this from his time on the planning board, then I do believe we're going to have a problem. He should not do so. He should be giving public comment directly.
Fred's also been the president of the South Walton Community Council and frequently speaks, for a large group of people who are concerned about water runoff. Fred has much knowledge about this that have nothing to do with the planning board, and Clay knows it, and Tony knows it, and they don't want him to be able to speak. And Boots doesn't know whether to scratch his watch or wind his butt, but he's going to about tell Clay he believes Fred. And Boots is telling the truth. He should believe Fred, and he should leave Fred in the job that Fred's in now, because he's helping the public tell the truth. Go ahead, Boots.
As a member of the public. Yes, sir, Mr.
Well, then I have a question. Mr. Trigger is my appointee, who I do value his opinion, being a board member.
Well,
I don't recognize it as a citizen as much as I do as his board member.
My admonishment still stands, Commissioner McCormick. Your individual planning board members do not get to give opinions to this board. That's not how.
But they get to tell the truth, Clay, and if there's new information out that he didn't have as a board member and you don't think that's relevant, That's not right. You're an idiot. We all know better. Go ahead, pontificating penguin.
The local planning agency is the planning commission, so their board opinion is the opinion you have to rely on.
I'll tell you what should be happening right now is Mac should be standing up as the planning director advising the board that there's new information. Maybe we should kick it back through planning to see what it is. But Mac will never do that because that's not what Mac is about. He's about getting developers what they want, not what's legal.
What we cannot ever get into a quasi-judicial proceeding is this. Well, I'm not going to vote one way or the other, Mr. Tricker, but if Mr. Tricker voted for it, shows up today and says, I changed my opinion. You can't consider that as changing how the planning board's action was because he had to do it within the scope of the hearing.
Fred didn't say he changed his opinion. Fred said there's information coming out that he as a board member never saw, and it came out yesterday. Quit putting words in Fred's mouth. That's not what he said, Clay.
You're welcome to value his opinion in whatever form you see fit, but he is giving this to you as a citizen, not as a member of the Walton County Planning Commission.
Correct.
His record of that planning commission meeting.
And the point I'm trying to make is I do concur that as a board member, he should not give testimony. That's me, how I feel.
Yeah.
The problem is I'm going to receive this. I cannot sit here and whatever he says, distinguish between what's him. And
that is why it is in the best interest of planning board members not to present to the board of county commissioners.
He's my appointee, and that's a board member. If he gets up here as a citizen, I'm just saying I'm not going to be able to separate the two. I mean, more as it become for me, anything he says is going to become as a board member.
That's why I advise against it and find it to be poor practice for members of advisory boards who've already passed on an issue to come and present before this board. But there is not a firm county that prohibits it.
Well, I'm saying
of course, Mr. Smith and his client may wish to assert that you're required to recuse yourself based on your statements. That would be all I can say. If you're saying that you cannot accord his testimony the same as you would any other citizen, then they have the right under 286.012 that there is fundamental bias or prejudice in the proceeding.
Well,
you got to be a judge here. Judge, your job is to say, I may like Mr. Tricker, I may know Mr. Tricker, but you're just giving your comments as Fred Tricker citizen, not as a board member. So, okay.
Well, sounds like Mr. Smith, you need to tell us if Commissioner McCormick's got to recuse himself or not.
Excuse me, could I just add something? As I'm not just representing myself as a citizen, I'm also representing South Walton Community Council. So it's not just my opinion.
So boom, they want Fred to give up his opinion and his free speech and his appointed position as the South Walton Community Council, which normally he would get 10 minutes to speak as a group spokesman. South Walton Community Council is not another governing council. There's no restriction about being on the planning board. Fred's only on one board in the county, the planning board. The other one is a volunteer environmental board to help preserve the south end of the county. There's absolutely no legal conflict between the two, but Clay and them are going to make one, and Boots is going to eat the bait.
It hasn't changed my vote. I'm still hearing it coming from.
And I'm not an expert witness. I mean, there's nothing I tell you that's going to be, in terms of a quasi-judicial hearing, it's not going to be material.
So if Mr. Tricker's stipulating that nothing he says is material for the public comment, substantial evidence, he's just offering public comment, can't use it in your decision-making process. That resolves the entire problem.
Now listen how stupid it is. If Fred says you don't have to really hear anything I have to say, and it doesn't matter, so Fred could say he saw a murder occur, but if Fred's not an expert on murder, Clay says it doesn't count. That's about how stupid Clay's advice is to the commissioners. Listen, the commissioners can vote no if they just think that it's not good for the community and it's not compatible with what's been there before. They're our representative, Clay. Clay, you're deciding what a commissioner can and can't do and what they have to do, and without considering the public. You're saying that the public, anybody in the public, unless they're a sworn expert, is not competent substantial evidence. And if that was true, why do we hold public hearings? What a freaking moron. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you, Trickle. Thank you.
Fred's just trying to speak, whatever it takes.
We don't need to go to Mr. Smith.
We'll let him say whatever he wants. Mr. Smith make his decisions afterward, but he's acknowledging that nothing that's said is for or against the project. So at this point, you have competent substantial evidence until someone presents otherwise, and the project his will not satisfy that standard.
Will you hold that in abeyance, Mr. Smith?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Proceed, Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Boy, that took a while.
Everything takes a
That's
while.
nice.
Well,
That's
I think
Canadian
this is
expert.
situation before. This is the first time around for me. I just want to make sure you nor I or anybody oversteps the line. It's going to hurt
So
somebody.
Fred's not trying to piss off Boots. He's trying to help do his job at South Walton Community Council. And Boots takes it
first of
personal.
all, I want to make it clear that SWCC has nothing against this project. It's probably a good project. So there's no objections or concerns there at all.
Could I interrupt you just a second?
Yes, sir.
And Fred and I've known each other.
Tony does not want. So now Tony, who's not an attorney, who didn't play one last night, hadn't stayed at the Holiday Inn, Jesus Christ, he is going to say all this stuff to try to intimidate Fred, because Tony doesn't want this said either, because he's a Shipman loyalist. He's part of the Shipman Mafia, and that's who pulls his strings, is these developers, and he cannot afford for the truth to get out, or he'll lose his support. Tony needs the lie to be perpetuated. So go ahead, phony Tony.
For several years, we have our love for this common, but I'm not trying to discredit Fred at all. He said he was not at the meeting eases my fears. But I just want to make sure don't get in trouble and we don't get in trouble.
You're not going to get in trouble. I recommend it against Mr. Tricker in this scenario as I would any planning commission member to this, but without his ability to speak as a member of the public, Mr. Tricker was president of the planning board.
Oh, was he?
He was saying there's information that's come up that's new, so he's asserting to you that he believes there is additional information that he is, I assume, going to comment on that was not presented when he was hearing this at the planning board. Is that?
That's correct.
So that's the line. Mr. Tricker asserts this under his rights as a citizen, and he's already acknowledged that it can't be used for adverse decision. So, unless this board decides to go against that, I don't see you getting in trouble for it, and he's taking that risk. My advice is, if you're on an advisory board, don't come talk to these boards after you've already voted on it. It's the best practice. It's tough, but it's the best practice. You can never get in trouble if you take that approach.
Clay doesn't want to let
Will
it
he get
go.
in trouble for this or not? I can't say that or not. I also don't know what he's going to say.
I don't know what he's going to say. First he said you're
we'll
not going to get in trouble.
Yes, we're fixing to find that, but if you would pull that down where we can hear you.
So this thing just to lean over.
There you go.
Is that okay? All right. So I want to congratulate Mr. Smith on his homework. Obviously, he has done a lot of work. None of this information, I don't believe, was available at the Planning Commission. And so I think there's a process issue here where people haven't had due process. They have not had an opportunity to look at this new evidence. So that's a question that I have. It's a legal question. And the other question...
Let's get a ruling on that first.
Okay.
So, as I understand it, the matter passed the Planning Commission with an understanding that it would pass the planning board with our approval, contingent on no new information being received by Paul during his meeting with Alan Osborne. Now, Mr. Receiving this meeting during that meeting with Alan Osborne that Mr. Smith just presented?
Here's the lie. I can prove this.
Oh, sorry.
Steve snuck up on
He wants my microphone. It's all yours.
Mr. Chairman, Steve Hall.
attorney for the land use component of the planning department. I am the attorney who, as I described it, probably the only one in several counties that wasn't involved at some point in the Sandestin debate. Mr. Osborne provided sworn testimony there that he had new information that had not been considered before, and that he wanted to.
That's the whole thing. The only people who can consider it is the BCC and NOPC, but they haven't. All the stuff on drainage, Dr. Harper's report, Clay hasn't complied, all the letters from the DCA, DEO, the findings of the Florida Board of Professional Engineers. Any person go to the public record, search Sandestin NOPC minutes, and search for these letters from the DEO and DCA, 2007, 2010, 2014, Dr. Harper's 2018 report, his 2015 preliminary report, Greg Graham's 2019 letter admitting Dr. Harper's calculations were correct. None of that is been before the board of consideration, and thereby it's all new. But Steve knows that, and he's going to lie anyway like a good soldier, a contract soldier.
Present that to the planning department, to the planning commission. And he then referred to a number of documents and made some claims in relation to specifically 2017.
And Fred was at that
the ordinance that David was talking to you about. So I volunteered before the vote to, with Mr. Osborne, it's going very quickly, and I couldn't catch all that he was trying to present. So I said I would sit down with him. Mr. Tricker and I sat down with him and had coffee, and went to a couple hours. And he explained his position. I then took everything that I had in my notes, carried it back to both the planning staff and to the applicant.
And they didn't ask me one question, but like Fred said, their whole brief changed. The whole brief. They said before they were dumping the water, they came here today and said they were retaining all of it. Well, good for him. I mean, really, honestly, good for this guy. It's good that this was such an awesome design, because he said he could, this engineer said he could retain 6.7 through all these steps, and he could meet the standard. The problem is the rest of the development order is not. And Danny's claimed it couldn't be met. But the bottom line is, this guy gave him a huge brief on how he was meeting that standard. And Steve's lying. There, you go search the minutes. This information has never been put before an NOPC, and the state has told them they've been in violation of the standards, and it's assumed to have been occurring since 2007. They've been in violation, and Clay and Mack are not even following the BCC's direction from 2021, almost 2 years before this. But go ahead and lie, Steve. No, Steve, there's no minutes indicating any of the stuff I gave you has been put before an NOPC or a compliance hearing on Sandestin DRI. It's been covered up. But go ahead and tell them it has.
As we do with all statement receive on any open application, we share it around and say, hey, this is now in the record. Can you respond
all this
to
is
these
in the
points?
record, and the staff has
So
covered
the
it
way
up.
I see the process has progressed is I committed to an interview to get more detail on the presentation that Mr. Osborne did in front of the Planning Commission.
And I shared that with the developer, and since the board, he's changed the project, as Fred said, and there's new information, and that guy knows, and Steve knows. So look, so it's been covered up. But go ahead, Steve.
Fulfilled that meeting. The results of that meeting back to staff and the applicant.
Unbelievable.
Ask them to respond. Tell me with all your knowledge and background, because as you've seen, we have 12 notebooks here behind me, which constitutes the physical record of the documentation that we've had on this project.
He's a lawyer, and if I were a lawyer, I'd walk up there and say, and right here is the NOPC 2017 showing that we had considered Dr. Harper's preliminary report in the NOPC. and that in the previous NOPC, and that we considered the 2000 letter from the DEO, the 2007, the 2010, the 2014 to the chair, the special master's findings, that we've put any of that stuff. If you have it, why don't you just say it's right here in the minutes and read it like a good lawyer? Because why? It's not in any NOPC or ordinance hearing minutes. It's been covered up by planning. Mac, the same guy got his license taken.
With everything that you guys know from your experience, is this new? Is this something that hasn't been raised before? Is this something that the department needs to consider? I think what you had tonight, Smith, was his response to those comments that were submitted.
Let me walk you back one step just to make sure we put a pin in that. You did not, based on your review of that material and your discussion with staff, you and staff did not determine that you were presenting new information.
That's correct.
So that would not affect the planning board's recommendation for approval.
That's correct.
They may have had the information, Clay, but what matters is to a competent board that Steve already explained. You were waiting on Dr. Harper's to present it to the board. You adopted it. Then y'all appealed it to the Florida Board of Professional Engineers. You lost. They said you're using the wrong standard. You're not complying with the BCC's motion, Clay. This is such BS that you're trying to fire. Boots, can you not see this, Boots? Can you really not see how you're playing along with this? And let's, hide the hot dog here with Clay and the real information and what this lawyer's not telling you. Why didn't he have a set of minutes in his hand from an NOPC saying we considered this and found it compliant? Because he can't. And you can't change that ordinance. It's a court order from 1984. And 89 ordinance can't be changed, or you lose the DRI, and that's big money.
Correct. And recommendation at the time that this was in compliance with drainage, traffic, and these other issues.
That's correct.
And what I would say is, based on what I've heard, I don't believe there's a due process issue. I don't see an adversely affected party saying they've been deprived of an opportunity of notice, of an opportunity to be heard, which is due process. Secondly, I would note that if it was already in compliance, they met, they reviewed these. Mr. Osborne, as a citizen, was given that opportunity. That was all made part of the planning staff's record. I think the applicant has a due process right. The applicant's due process rights to respond to what's brought up against him. This is not the introduction of different evidence. Mr. Moxy believes it's his interpretation or response. I don't believe it's a due process issue.
I think what you heard from the applicant tonight is in line with what you hear on any major development application where public comments or citizen comments have been received. You need to address these in front of the board. And that's, I believe, was the genesis of his analysis.
Listen, it's not like any other development because it's a DRI. If you're hiding non-compliance intentionally when every agency is telling you, you have a due process issue because the law assumes that the county people and the governmental people will tell the truth. And so it's hinging on not doing anything fraudulent. You know who does fraudulent stuff? Well, go read his settlement agreement with McDonald Carpenter on that thing. Matt, your settlement agreement said you did fraudulent stuff. You surrendered your license. And somehow, and there's no minutes in this attorney's hand, but this is why they want Fred gone. That ain't who needs to be gone. It's the people who've hidden this kind of stuff from the government and spent money on it. They should be in jail.
And resulted in what he presented to you tonight.
I think that's both Mr. Hall and I telling you it's not a due process issue.
Any questions for Mr. Hall? Continue, Mr. Tricker.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'm not an expert witness, but I think Dr. Harper was in as an expert. You all paid him a lot of money in this situation. And my understanding is that his assertion that the 6.7 standard was for treatment. It wasn't just retention, it was for treatment. And that's like opposite to what Mr. Smith said. So I'm not positive about that, but I'm pretty sure. And when you brought him back in to do a further study, a second study, that was to look at how you would fix the problem of meeting the 6.7 inch standard. And the cost of that, as I recall, was something like $11 million. Do you remember that?
That sounds about right.
I mean,
Commissioner Anderson,
I don't remember what the number was.
I mean, it was a big number, so that spooked everybody. We've had a lot of discussions about nailing it down as to what the standard actually is. And it's been discussed many times. And I recall a BCC meeting. Mike Barker had just been elected commissioner, and he made.
Fred is going to tell him that Boots said in this meeting where Fred's referring to, and this is what pissed Boots off. Boots said that the county, he didn't have any idea what standard they were supposed to be using after seeing all the information. And so Fred's reminding Boots that Clay and Mac are a year and a half overdue already on that answer.
A statement that he felt like he's like the rest of us. None of us really know for sure what the standard should be, but he felt like we should get to the bottom of it and get it resolved once and for all. I don't think that's ever been done. You know, tonight is probably the first time that I've heard that kind of detail about what the standard is and what it means. And Mr. Smith went at it a little bit differently. He wasn't arguing against the 6.7 inch standard as not being applicable. He was basically saying, well, what they provided meets that standard. So that's a little different argument. But I think it still behooves the BCC to look into this and determine once and for all if the 6.7 standard is the applicable standard, then the Sandestin DRI is not in compliance. And I think that has to be evaluated. I don't think it's up to us. I think it takes somebody. It's a legal question, and I think you have to have somebody independent that'll review it, look at it, and give us a final determination. Because I think there's been so much conflicting information over the years that I don't think any of us really knows for sure.
Clay's telling
where the truth is.
Don't you dare bring this up.
I certainly don't know. I mean, I sat through the meeting with Alan and Mr. Hall, and I followed the conversation, but in no way could I follow the arguments. This is complicated. It's really complicated.
Not complicated.
I couldn't do it. So that's why I'm not even trying to imply that I understand any of this stuff. It's too complex. So
I will say I more an engineering issue than it is a legal issue.
Well, it is with respect to whether, I think Mr. Smith's argument was that he provided a system that actually is better than the 6.7 inch standard. So that's not the issue. The issue is whether the 6.7 inch standard is the standard and whether it's for attenuation or retention.
But I think, and I'm sorry, Mr. Commissioner, but I think, Mr. Smith, that you correct me if I'm wrong. I think Mr. Smith's assertion is that the standard that we're applying now is a higher standard than what the
that's not what he said. He
1976
said he's meeting
standard was, which is 6.7 inches. Now we're applying a 13.4 inch.
For this project, yes, sir.
For this project, not for the overall DRI.
Well, then maybe this is a question for Mr. Carpenter, but is that what we're applying to the rest of it? No? Then why are we applying to the rest of it?
The 84.
What's the 84 standard?
It's still higher.
6.7
I believe this is a legal question, that I don't think you can resolve with stormwater in.
Well, I'll take the board. I think it's not a legal question. It comes down to an understanding of the stormwater standards, because we're talking about storm.
Clay doesn't want to have to answer and be held responsible. Yeah, this guy just said he went and read the information. Steve Hall told this engineer the information I gave, so that guy went there like he said, like Fred said, and changed what he presented, what he saw, what Fred saw. And this guy made sure that he met the standard that I claimed. But the issue, like Fred says, is this. If this guy right here just changed his plan to make sure he could comply, then he's acknowledging that that is the right standard. But Mac wants the county standard put inside the DRI, and he's been told by the state, by the Florida Board of Engineers, and by their own expert, Dr. Harper, that that's not what the standard is, and that's not what the ordinance says. And they're just ignoring the law, and you can't do that. If you wanted to change the law, then you have to do that through legislation, not just by acting like it's not there. That's like the border law for Democrats. They act like we don't have any policy. It's like, come on down, you're the next free check on the taxpayers are getting it. So go ahead, watch what happens. Clay wants to pass the hot dog.
Mr. Smith did a very good job of discussing what are you talking about? Is it quality? Runoff? What are we talking about? That's what you got to decide. Mr. Smith has presented his opinion. I do not believe this board needs to reach the overall DRI issue tonight, because regardless of what's there.
But because if they did, then that would halt everything. And Clay doesn't want that, because if they just said we don't know what the standard is, then they can't go forward. They've got to have hearings. Clay doesn't want that, and neither does Mac. And neither does Sandestin Investments, who owns most of the rights for the Sandestin DRI. The only people that, the rest of the public is just getting hammered, and the owners.
He's saying, one, he's not using the lakes, he's not using some stormwater systems, and he exceeds all standards that would be applicable. So for this project, I want to go and put a pin on that issue. How we can get there. I don't disagree with Mr. Tricker that getting a definitive answer on this would be helpful. And I think it's necessary. And I think every member of this board has heard me say that, by the way. Mr. Tricker and I disagree on the legal issue. I think Mr. Kerr, we as attorneys can read what was written, but it's not written in any one of these documents is what the 1976 standard was specifically. Mr. Smith has given us his opinion of why it meant quality versus not quality, why it wouldn't be one, why it's one and clearly not the other. To me, that answer for the board and for you, Mr. Tricker, is best addressed by a stormwater engineer with experience in how the standards were applied 74 forward. So the pre-76 standard into 84. I think Mr. Smith's not qualified to do it. I'm saying he's here on behalf of the applicant. So it's not going to be the court representative. But certainly I think that is how you get that answer, because there's a second component. There are multiple layers of this, but the second component ultimately becomes if it's not in compliance, and somebody tells us that, it's not just what is the fix, but what are the.
Look, Clay's trying to tell him, okay? Clay's trying to tell him that, hey, if the thing's in non-compliance, we're in trouble. But guess what? They've already been told it's in non-compliance. They've got multiple letters in the possession of planning that Clay knows, including from his own engineer, and he's got a motion by the BCC to act that's 1.5 years old. But Clay does not want to talk about that, and the ultimate thing is to fire Fred over what Clay doesn't want to talk about. I mean, you can't make this shit up.
Are they remedial? Are they prospective? Are they retroactive? What are they? and how can those be addressed? Those are the things to be considered. But broadly for tonight, I would say none of that goes into play on this specific project, and this applicant is entitled to the project.
Because if we admitted that, we'd have to stop this right now, and I don't want that to happen to this feller, because we shouldn't even have processed this project, because we had the same information when this project started that we do right now, and we still didn't act on it. It's just that Mr. Osborne told Mr. Tricker about it, and we thought we'd get this away with this while he was out of town, and now Fred's told on us too.
Based on what they're submitting. Now, if they were trying to say, hey, we want the 76, we want the 84 standards for the 76, that will be squarely in front of you. They're saying they met and exceed those. Unless there's evidence that they don't, I think they have ticked that box.
Commissioner McCormick?
Yes, I concur that there's this too, but I don't think that applies to this project.
Boots, you said that a year and a half ago, and you said Mac told you guys y'all wouldn't consider any major projects, and this is your fifth one since that March 9th, 2021 meeting. Come on, Boots, can you not remember that far back? You were one of the ones that spoke out about it, and now you say it don't matter. Good Lord.
I think that should be a separate conversation altogether. It doesn't play on this project. For this, no matter which standard we use, or at the end of the day, if we look into this supersedes even either one of the two formulas you use. And with that said, since they're not adding to the problem, they're keeping their problem.
Y'all watch Boots carefully. His old pea brain, I swear, the squirrels on the exercise wheels in there are running as fast as his little thing can pedal. No, Boots, because if it's true that 6.7 is the standard, then the whole thing shuts down. It's in substantial deviation, and this guy can't continue either. Nobody can, Boots. That's the whole point, and Clay's covering it up, and you don't get that.
Don't see where that question, one way or the other, affects this project.
The only thing that has an impact on this project is whether the 6.7 inch standard is attenuation or retention, and it does have an impact.
So you're talking about, I'm not an expert on this, but you're talking about the high standard of the two choices. You're looking at a 25-year to a 50-year storm plan. Yeah, they've gone beyond that. What I'm trying to make here, no matter which one of these standards we use, I feel they've gone beyond, and it's not applicable to this because they're not putting this water into the system. It's self-contained. And I just don't see, no matter which side the fence you're on, how this applies to this problem.
Okay, I'm not a stormwater engineer, but his analysis was based on the 6.7 inches being a retention standard. And I don't think that's what the Harper report said.
Okay.
There's a big difference in how that affects the analysis.
I don't see it that way if the standard that they're using is higher.
We can let Mr. Smith address. I think he's going to tell you he's retaining all of it, so that negates it, is what the presentation was.
He's probably got 3 pages of notes already. Just one other thing, if I may, regarding the legal question. I think it is a legal question, and I'll tell you why.
Boots is so
because the 6.7 inch standard that Mr. Osborne believes is the one that is actually still in effect is not the one Walton County's been using. They've been using the Land Development Code standard, which is a half an inch. And for everything that's happened since they started doing that is not been meeting. If the 6.7 standard is the one that's still in effect, the DRI is not in compliance. And that is something that has to be determined for the future projects.
Well, Mr. Tricker, I think you would agree. The first question is, what is the proper standard?
Absolutely. I think
that's what I'm saying.
So there you go. Clay knows the county's question is, what is the proper standard? They don't know, But the bottom line is, I'll cut to the chase, is they vote to approve this, and Boot is mad. But I need to get all this on video. Hold on.
Until that's legal, any of these other areas being required to weigh in is premature. That, I think it is a simple analysis starting at a stormwater analysis and making that determination. Start there. It may well.
Did you hear what Clay just said? That we're just going to continue on, and just like we have for the last 16 years, and we haven't determined what it is, and we've just applied the standard we wanted to, whether we were right or not. We just soldiered on and got the job done by ignoring the truth. Go ahead, Clay. You got to slow Clay down and listen to what he really says, because he's full of shit.
Down to legal sometime down the road. I'm not saying the threshold question deals with stormwater and the standards.
Yeah, so as far as this application is concerned, I don't, in my heart, I don't believe it matters. But I think the whole DRI question is one that you all need to address.
Well, let me say this. I've been saying since 2017 we need to get this fixed. One way or the other, we need to know, because frankly, someone like Mr. Smith shouldn't have to do this to get a project approved. There should be some certainty and the process, and the only way for that to happen is for this board to say what the standard is. Period. One way or the other. I agree with you 100%. Been saying that for a long time, but
that's it right there. So Danny knows it's on the board to sit in the NOPC and have all this evidence laid to them. Clay's admitted they don't know what the standard is, and Boots wants to fire Fred. So let's show that they really spool Boots up and go to the next meeting. So this is it for Fred. Stand by. So now we proceed on to February 8th, 2024. And you're going to see Boots, without even talking to Fred, be so wound up over what happened in November 28th that he's thought about it for about 45 days. And now, without even telling Fred, watch what he does, okay? Because that's what we're here about. All right, Boots, go get him.
Let's go. Commissioner McCormick.
Okay. Got a request here from the board. It's pretty much black and white. I'm making a request to remove Fred Tricker from the District 1 Commissioner appointee seat on the Planning Commission, and would like to appoint Bill Curry to fill the vacancy for the remainder of the term, which expires January 31st, 2025.
Are you making that a motion?
I'll make that a motion.
second.
Okay. Discussion on the board?
Yes.
John?
Yeah, Donna, this
According to our Land Development Code 1.10.03 Planning Commission, it states that terms of the members of the Walton County Planning Commission shall be for 2 years. A member whose term expires may continue to serve. And then it goes on to say that commissioners shall have the authority to remove any member of the Walton County Planning Commission for cause on written charges after a public hearing. So we haven't had a public hearing. I haven't seen written charges. So are we going to abide by our ordinance or our land development code?
If you saw Danny just look at Boots and raise his eyebrows, look at him just a minute ago.
Per the code, once the board appoints, the removal process is outlined as Commissioner John says. Just like when you took over, Commissioner John, certainly a board member who nominates a person, since they're not your appointee, you can ask, would they be so kind as to step down to allow you to appoint someone else? What I would recommend is that be the first step in this process, because otherwise it would be the formal removal process that you would need to engage in to remove a member of the Planning Commission.
Okay, so how do we say?
I would think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I would think what he's saying is that you would ask Mr. Tricker to resign. Is that correct?
Yes, if he's willing to, you can appoint someone new. If not, if you have written cause, we will schedule this for a public hearing at the next board meeting and bring it back then for the board to conduct a hearing for the removal of that planning board member.
Will we need to withdraw those motions?
In line with circumstances.
Let
The motion would be to schedule it. We just amended to schedule the public hearing and allow Commissioner McCormick.
Let me ask you this. Can I pull my motion and make the motion to continue this to next table it to
Danny says, I'm just backing you up, just in case, old Tony didn't get it over there. I'm just backing you up, ex-deputy. I saw you nominated another next ex-deputy for this position. Brad Drake's looking at Danny like he wants to stab him because he sees what the hell's going on. He knows Fresh Tricker's a good man, and so does Donna. So they're just trying to figure out what the play is.
the next
It's your item. You need to maybe pull your motion. We can bring it back and do it.
I'll pull my motion, and then now I'll make a motion just table it to next
You
meeting.
don't even need to do it. It's your item. You just can bring it up whenever you want. No need to table it.
All right.
But if he wants to have the public hearing, he needs to make the motion, correct?
We would not be tabling it. We would need to schedule the public hearing on those issues. So if we would need to schedule that at some point in time.
And you don't have to just request for that to be on the agenda.
I would ask that we make a motion to schedule it. I didn't understand he was asking to schedule a public hearing now.
He's withdrawn his motion.
What I'd like to do is just pull it off the table and contact Mr.
So he's going to take the first option to talk to the appointee first. If that doesn't work, then we'll be to schedule a public hearing with a request on the next agenda.
With the county administrator.
We can take care of that.
Okay.
And so that's where it brings us. Boots didn't tell anybody. He didn't ask Fred. He didn't know what was going on. So he's going to go ask Fred Tricker. Hold on just a second here. And so now Boots is going to ask us Fred Tricker. And let me give you a hint. Fred Tricker's not going to step down. So in order just to shorten this show just a little bit, the next meeting, Boots schedules a cause hearing. And that's where we stand today. So we don't know what Fred's being accused of, but that's how we got here today. Fred told the truth about Sandestin, and you heard what Clay and the commission, you heard what Danny Glidewell said, you heard what Boots said, and you didn't see Mac or any of them. You heard, where was the document, Steve? If they had documents in the NOPC showing they had reviewed the standard, they simply would have produced them, but they didn't. Instead, they've created a witch hunt about Fred Tricker because he's smart enough to have looked at all the information, and he's asked the county attorney and he asked the county administrator, do you have any paperwork that refutes what Mr. Osborne claims and has produced in his paperwork? And the answer was no. So why hasn't that been put to the BCC? Is it because Clay has a policy that, look over here, squirrel, if you don't let them tell you, if you don't admit you're breaking the law, then you can't be in the trouble unless you get caught? Well, look, commissioners, all of you have a duty to go enforce this. And look what's going on. Like I said, if you don't know it out there, people, there's a lawsuit about people who lost appendages, their arms or legs. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but SaveOurBays.net, there's a whistleblower lawsuit going on right now in Walton County about the pollution in the bay. We're going to have another show about that, but you can't make this up. But let's stop the persecution of Fred. Boots, do the right thing and pull that off the agenda. If you want to do the right thing, Boots, demand that, make a motion for a moratorium to start hearings on the Sandestin DRI to determine if the drainage is in compliance and the traffic. Think about this, Sandestin. If they're widening your roads, the open space is going to change again, isn't it? I don't think you have enough to do that. I'd ask the questions. Or is Tony going to make y'all play in the middle of the roads and the middle of the new roads will be your open space? Is that what you bought? You can't make this shit up, and you shouldn't be able to fire Fred Tricker. Y'all tell your commissioners and tell Boots, leave Fred alone. He's doing a good job. That's the way it was on the Alan Osborne Show. See you next time when we see some more bullshit going on in the county. You can't make this shit up. Y'all keep them straight. You hear?